going to call to order the meeting of the Utility Finance Oversight Committee. Could we please have a roll call?
Chairperson Engelmann. Here. Vice Chairperson Bennett.
Here.
Member Bowling.
Here.
Member Scott. Here. Member Spell.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Is there any public comment? Let me call for public comment. Seeing none, we'll proceed on to approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes, and are there any amendments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move for approval of the January 29th, 2018 draft meeting minutes.
Thank you. That's a first from Randy Bowling
Second?
and a second from Bruce Scott. All in favor?
Aye.
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 It's unanimous, none opposed. So I see no modifications to the agenda. So let's move ahead. I want to start, I want to call on Mike Spell to give a report first on the budget as far as what he found when he went over to meet with staff.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to give the committee an update on an issue we've been dealing with for about the last year, and that was the citywide financial policies, and specifically how they represent the enterprise funds. Well, there is some real confusion in the citywide, and I had been working with the fiscal staff to amend these to get them more, to clarify them and to get them more in line with what can be done and with the FCS report. Well, I met last week with staff from fiscal and from Public Works. First of all, they were going to show us the new presentation format, and during our discussions, I brought it up again about that we, as this committee in our resolution, are supposed to deal with compliance with both the consultant's report on their financial statements as well as the citywide. So it kind of put us in a bind since the citywide are still confusing. But I want to let the staff or the committee know that Jason and Pam have told me that yes, because of turnover, they weren't even aware of some of these issues that we had brought up in the past, so that they will be working to get these citywide policies clarified. So I just want to keep everybody posted and get this on the record that it's not being forgotten, and that we do want to get them revised to be more in step with what the policy should be.
Thank you, Mike. Committee, are there any questions of Mike Spell or staff? All right. Okay, let's get going. Could I first have staff all introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. Darren Schultz, Public Works Director.
Jason Lake, Chief Financial Officer.
Pamela Ganger, Accounting Manager.
David Bruchetta, Utility Manager.
Dan Yu, Deputy DA with the DA's office.
Thank you. I know that Jason introduced himself at our last meeting, but I wanted to be sure everybody had a chance to know who he was and so forth. And so, Jason, you're going to be leading off on our presentation. Is that right?
That is correct, Chair.
All right. So, shall we get started on the
Sure.
budget?
Thank you. Jason Lake, Chief Financial Officer. So this is a little bit different format than you're used to seeing. At your last meeting, you commented that you wanted to see a very similar presentation to what the Board of Supervisors will see. So we included the material that is going to the Board of Supervisors for you as well. And I've prepared a short PowerPoint presentation going over each of the budgets and their compliance. And so with that, I'll jump right in. But feel free to interrupt me with any questions that you might have along the way. So we're going to jump into agenda item 3A, which is the review of the tentative budget for the sewer fund. Highlights for that particular fund: there's been no increase in the usage rates in the budget, but we are in the third year of the 5-year phase-in for the connection charge increases. Salaries and benefits increased by almost $238,000. This was primarily due to an increase in FTE and employee merit and benefit increases. Service and supplies increased by about $212,000, and that's primarily driven by the cost allocation plan increase for the fund by $180,000, and then changes within professional services and the effluent for the golf courses. The planned capital outlay for fiscal year 19 is $7,338,000. And if you had any questions specifically related to that, I'm going to turn those questions over to the Public Works Department to answer any questions that you might have on their capital outlay strategies. So, any questions before I move on? Okay.
I just have excuse me, just real quick. In doing these budgets, did we take into consideration all the new construction that is getting started and so forth, the new housing?
To a certain extent, we did. We included modest increases in the revenue line items that should accommodate for those. But building is often delayed or implemented not on our schedule, so we take our best guess as to when that actually will occur.
Mike Spell?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Jason, couple questions. It says we increased by 0.6 FTEs, and this was to reallocation of current employees. That has nothing to do with the proposed reorganization, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then I did have one other question. In the expenditures category, under salaries, we have the temporary staff. Are the temporary staff the people that are, we will be discussing later in the marathon contract? Or is that something different?
That's something different.
Okay.
If it's in personnel, those are actual city employees that we hire on a temporary basis.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
All right. The next slide is the projection out for 20 years on future planned capital. And so you can see that there's $95 million within the sewer fund in planned capital improvements out that far. Obviously, this is dependent upon cash flow and operating activities and construction and a number of different variables related to that. This is just a summary presentation. Your packet contained the full detail of what those planned expenditures are. The cash flow budget, this is kind of a little mini presentation of the cash flow. This is off of the state form. So you can see operating revenues of about $15 million, operating expenditures of about $6 million, and then we've got the debt proceeds, the debt service, and the capital outlay. And most of all of the debt proceeds are going into capital-related projects. But you can see within the 19 proposed budget, since there's very limited debt, there's no debt proceeds in 19 planned, all of that is being funded by prior debt proceeds and operating cash flow. Questions? So then we get into the fun stuff that you guys are really excited about. So we've got the sewer fund financial policies, and within here, the sewer fund for each of the fiscal years presented, excluding actual 15, meets all of the financial policies that are in place, and including into the projection for fiscal year 19 as well. So in fiscal year 15, we did not meet the system reinvestment funding, and we did not have enough capital planned in that fiscal year to meet the reinvestment strategy. But for the other 4 years, we meet all financial policies. Any questions on the sewer fund? With that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
right, thank you. I do have a couple of questions. First of all, committee, any of you have questions on any part of the sewer funds? And I guess I'd direct this at Dave or whoever, I'm not sure who. Is any part of this containing payments for consultants or studies? Any of that in the sewer budget?
The professional services line item would be involved with engineering-related service activities.
Could you tell us what kind of studies or under professional services?
So every year, we have a list, and I can provide it to you, I can email it to you, but what we do is we take a look at what some of our engineering services needs are for the water, sewer, and stormwater budget, but specific to sewer, there's a list of activities that we have planned over the next 5 years that would be funded out of the professional services budget. And I'd be happy to email that to you to show what we had planned for this year and what we have planned, or at least conceptually planned, for the up-and-coming years.
Yes, I'd appreciate that, and email it to the entire committee, please, so everybody can see it. And I would like the same thing for each of these funds.
Okay, yep, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's, are there any other questions? Yes, Randy?
Madam Chair. Jason, under the sewer fund, I'm looking at page 52, Schedule F1, it says operating expense, utility enterprises, and the third item there is service and supplies. For the tentative budget, it's essentially 4.6, 4.7 million. Included in that category, is that internal service charges,
Yes.
which essentially is what other divisions or departments do on behalf, or perform on behalf of
Yes.
the sewer fund?
The internal services are an allocation to reimburse the general fund for costs incurred by those staff in relation to the sewer fund.
It's probably in the sheet somewhere. Could you tell me what the magnitude, how much that is of the 4 point?
Of the 4.2 million, it is, it's in the operating one before that. Sorry, I'm rummaging through the papers trying to find it.
As did I.
Total internal service charges, there's about 2 million there. In very rough figures, roughly $2 million within the sewer fund.
2 million approximately. How is that allocation calculated or derived? Is it based on the actual services provided?
It is. There's actually, I brought it with me, the agenda item with the Board of Supervisors, where we do an actual, very detailed cost allocation plan that estimates out all of the various services that are provided by the general fund to all the other funds. And we'd be happy to share that with you if you would like to see the detail of that.
Just in general, that's a charge that the sewer fund is responsible for, the 2 million?
Yeah, it reimburses the general fund for the costs incurred related to, like as an example, the district attorney's office, my office, and all of those
So it's
functions.
based on the level of effort expended by the various departments.
Yeah.
So does that mean that either Public Works or Utilities, they have control over the expenses that they incur?
To a certain extent, they do. But it really depends on the level of activity that the fund is involved in. So this charge is based off of, you could see going back, there's a significant expenditure related to capital outlay. And so those type of expenditures, you're looking at contracting with the DA's office, the city manager's office, finance, payroll, all of those sort of functionality are accounted for within the general fund, and it's a reimbursement to the general fund for those costs.
Without dancing around it, my concern is that's a big chunk of change.
It is.
And I was wondering how much control the sewer fund or utilities actually has over that. It sounds like from
Some control, but not a whole lot, just depends on what they're doing. So if they're just running normal operations and whatnot, there's a lot of employees that are involved there, but a lot of that also is dependent upon contracting and different things like that. So it's a function of the activity within the fund.
Okay.
So,
Randy, excuse me. You may be interested to know that at the end of every year or the fiscal year, they do what is called a true-up, which was something that Supervisor Lloyd Bagwell got instituted, so that they actually look and see how much, not just what was estimated, but how much we actually spent. This year, water got back a large amount of money, and I believe sewer had to pay some when they looked at the actual expenses versus what had been estimated. Jason, you can correct me, or?
Pam Ganger, accounting manager. You're absolutely right, actually. Between the three funds, stormwater, sewer, and water, the total cost went down $118,000. Stormwater incurred extra costs, sewer incurred extra, and water got a little bit of a refund. So that's right.
Randy first and then Bruce.
So does that mean, Pam, that even though there's a true-up at the end of the year, there is, I guess my concern is there's parity then between the amount of services required by the utility and the amount of funding that they're charged?
Yes.
Yeah, it's, the whole city budget is tied to the accounting mechanism that allocates those costs. But for what it's worth, I would observe that as we sit here with a water utility and a sewer utility who are hurting for funds and revenues and capital budget monies, it would sure be nice if over a period of time, the board could find a way to treat more of these expenses as general fund expenses in order to allow the enterprise funds to take the revenues and really keep them within the direct operations. And I realize that direct operations include the DA's office and the clerk's office and that sort of thing. But just as an observation, given the difficulty of raising rates, this is conceivably a place where a gradual change in the general fund system could help the water, sewer, and storm drain utilities.
I won't ask for a suggestion on how to do that. That's not on the agenda, so.
Just an observation.
Yeah, right. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Mike Spell?
Yeah, I have a caveat on that discussion there. The general fund needs to be funded, and if we take money out of the general fund, it's got to come from somewhere else, either taxes or another program. That's the simplicity of this whole thing.
And I wouldn't speak to it being in parity, but there was a reduction in the tax rate this year. So.
Okay, now we'll move on. Jason, you want to continue?
I have nothing further for this agenda item unless you have questions.
Well, shall we go to the next?
Do you want to, I was anticipating that you would take each agenda item and approve the resolutions attached with them at that time.
Okay, I hadn't asked the committee what they wanted to do that one by one, or whether they want to wait till the end. Bruce?
I do have one, I guess, clarification in that case. In the sewer fund highlights, under the services and supplies adjustments, we have effluent golf courses decrease of $60,000. Does that reflect the the reduction in purchase of potable water?
I can answer that one. What that has to do with was the agreement that we have with Duncan Golf. And so there was a change. There was a $75,000 line item that we had before, 2 line items that encompass $75,000. So instead of, they're going to take on a lot more of the operating commitment side of things. So we're going to keep $15,000 in the operating side, but the $60,000 decrease would come out of the operating side and then put into capital. So there'll be a $60,000 lump sum available in capital.
Thank you. That reminded me, the effluent, we're charging for effluent, no, we're charging for the potable water that supplements the effluent to the golf courses?
Yes, that's been the past practice.
So, and we'll still be doing that this year?
I've not heard of any changes, so.
All right. Is it the same rate? The rate hasn't changed? We're charging the same amount of money?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any rate changes.
All right, thank you. Just checking. Looking for every little penny we can find. All right. Committee, do you want to make a motion on the sewer fund at this point and making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors? There is a suggested motion in your packet.
Madam Chair, could I do have one question for David. The $7.3 million in capital outlay, is that the listing of projects that you said that we would be receiving?
Yeah, there is a capital plan associated with the packet.
Could you steer me to it?
It's going to be near the last page. Looks like a big spreadsheet.
Page 40. Try. Randy, looks like this.
Thank you.
I will note that I don't think you could have gotten these figures any smaller.
Yeah, we had the same concern. We tried to do as best we could to get it on one page.
Some of the others I did take and enlarge, I was able to enlarge on my copy machine, and so there was room for that, so, you know. So Randy, I'm trying to give you time to look over that list. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, so, once again, I'm, Bruce?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would make a motion to recommend to the Board of Supervisors the approval of the tentative sewer fund budget for the fiscal year 2019 and acknowledge that it is in compliance with the adopted financial policies.
I have a first, is there a second?
Second.
Mike Bennett, seconded. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. It's unanimous, passes. Let's move on to the next fund.
The next fund is the water fund. It highlights, we have some highlights for you. Again, no increase in the rates are included, but we are in the third year of a 5-year phase-in for the connection charges. Salaries and benefits increased by about $65,000. This is primarily a function of the increase for employee merit and benefit changes, and then a decrease in FTE by a half position. Services and supplies decreased by $579,000. This is primarily driven by the change in the internal service fund charges, where there's a decrease of $384,000. Water and meter services decreased by $100,000, and electricity charges decreased by another $100,000. Capital outlay plan for the fiscal year is roughly $3.5 million. This is a slide representing the 20-year projection for capital outlay, and you'll notice that there's $143.5 million in planned capital outlay through this process. This is a slide demonstrating water consumption by the various types, and the squiggly line running through it is the revenue for the fund. And so you can see that there's been a substantial drop in water consumption for the city, while revenues are going higher. The water.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, please? Did you say that there's a drop in water consumption while the revenues are going higher?
That is correct.
It's called a rate increase.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you.
Water fund cash flow budget, this is coming off the state form, so you can see we're at roughly $16 million in annual revenue. There's about $8 million in operating expenditures, and then debt service and capital outlay make up the remainder of the expenditures. The financial policies for the water fund. You can see the demonstration there. I will note for fiscal year 19, the projection that we are out of compliance in relation to the system reinvestment category and the debt to equity ratio. And so for the system reinvestment, we're shy of that funding by about $900,000. And then the debt to equity ratio is supposed to be based off of the goal, a 50-50 split, and we're at a 53-47 split. So we've got more debt in this fund than the financial policies would allow for. So, any questions related to the water fund?
Well, we don't have, there's no rate increase this year, is that correct, gentlemen?
That is correct.
And in fact, none is forecasted either in the future at this point in time, is that correct?
There's nothing with the Board of Supervisors for changes to the rates right now.
There was a study talked about. Darren, I think it had to do with stormwater.
Are you talking about a rate study? Yes, we will be doing a rate study on all three funds the end of this calendar year.
The end of this calendar year?
That's correct.
So you're talking 2019, it'll start the end of 2018?
I would expect the end of 2018 and into 2019.
Into 2019. And that's for all three funds, and the board's already approved that?
No, they haven't approved that, but that's what, the last update that I gave them when we were discussing stormwater, I let them know that that was my plan, that we would be doing. They asked for a full stormwater rate review, and I said that at the end of this year, we would be doing an update rate review on water and sewer, and it was fiscally responsible to lump them all together, and that's what we would be planning to do.
Right. Oh, excuse me, Bruce, go ahead.
No, that's, so potentially then that the cost of that is included in the current budget.
That's right. When you look at the professional services line item that was mentioned earlier, that's what would pay for those rate reviews, correct? Fiscal year 19.
Because as I recall, at the board discussion, there was the election to get into a more detailed rate review, and that was kind of the genesis, I think, of what we're just hearing from Darren.
So that's something that would go out to bid, is that correct?
There will be an RFP process, and it will be selected based on qualifications, not on cost, correct?
And when do you foresee that possibly getting started? First, the board has to approve it, is that correct?
So the anticipation is to put out an RFP the end of this calendar year and make a selection in December of January, and that contract would go back before the BOS for approval.
Would you get board approval before you put out the RFP?
No.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Mike, Spell?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. This is from the page 2 of the budget preparation worksheet in the service and supplies category. Darren, when we met the other day, you were talking about our water contract with the state, and I'm looking at water purchase with state, and in FY17, we purchased almost, if I'm reading this correctly, about 1.9 million. Was this the contract you were discussing last week, that that it's going to come up for renegotiation?
Yes, this is a water purchase for the state, so that's basically our water, or our Marlette, in our East Slope water. We are currently working under an expired contract with the state, and so we've been working with them off and on for about 2 years of updating that contract, and there's a number of things the city has requested be fixed in that contract. We just had a meeting with them yesterday, and they've promised to move us to the front burner, so we're hopeful.
Do you think the end result will be the price will go up, or can we get it maybe renegotiated to go down a little?
I would anticipate that my goal is to somehow keep the price the same and for it not to go up overall. The problem with a lot of that contract and the money that we're paying are on previous bonds, which we can't change, and previous equipment that was purchased that we can't change. So until that gets paid off, that rate's not going to go down. What I'm hoping that, though, is that the consumption charge does not go up any longer, and we level off.
Okay, great.
It's right now, for $1 million, we don't get enough water. It's poor value for Carson City, and I've explained that to them. So the goal is to continue to pay $1 million, but to get more quantity of water that is usable.
Excuse me. Is that because there's just going to be a lack of activity on the capital projects, or is that where we're getting that refund back?
This fund is primarily driven on the refund for the prior credit.
Okay, good.
I'm sure the committee has already observed this, but I'd like to make the observation for the record that we have $144 million of a capital outlay plan for the next 20 years, but yet, actually, if you could go back to the slide you were just at, our system reinvestment funding is not only not meeting its target, but is declining. So I think, while I hate to say it because I am a ratepayer in the city, I think a rate study of the water fund is probably appropriate at this time.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, there being none, do I hear a motion to tell the board that the bad news on this issue? Bruce?
I'll make a motion, but I'd like to preface it with I guess a reminder that the revenues are woefully short of the needs, following up on what Mike Bennett just said, and that the situation in water is in a difficult position that I would hope could be addressed in a more comprehensive way by the board or provide direction to the staff to do so going forward. The sewer fund is in better shape. With that, Madam Chair, I would move to recommend the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative water fund budget for fiscal year 2019 and acknowledge that it is not in compliance with the adopted financial policies.
I have a first and a motion and a first. Do I hear a second?
I second that.
A second from Mike Spell. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. Passes unanimously. Let's move on to the next one.
Certainly. The next fund is the Stormwater Fund, and this fund did have a rate increase. There was a 30% rate increase adopted by the Board of Supervisors on August 3rd, 2017. That rate increase was specifically designed for the ability to pay debt service on a new roughly $5 million bond that we'll get into talking about. But it was not designed as a comprehensive rate study type increase that you would have seen in water or sewer. It was specifically designed to pay debt service on this bond. And so that goes back to Mr. Schultz's comments earlier about having that comprehensive rate study done for all three funds. So with that, the salaries and benefits increased by about $6,000. All of that is directed at employee merit and benefit increases. There was no change in the FTE allocation within this fund. Services and supplies increased by $116,000. The internal service charge increased by $85,000, and professional services increased by $31,000. The capital outlay plan for fiscal year 19 is nothing, but you will note that there's significant future capital outlay on the budget worksheet material that's identified there, and the $5 million in bonds will likely require an augmentation into the fiscal year 19 in order to finalize all of those projects. So even though there's nothing budgeted today, there's likely to be an augmentation to complete those projects.
Could you go into a little more detail on that last item?
Certainly. So we've got $5 million in capital outlay planned related to this bond issue. It's not likely that we will complete all $5 million worth of those costs before the end of June. And so the status of those projects will roll over to the following fiscal year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I was identifying, there's $31 million over the next 20 years of capital outlay projects that are identified on the material for you. A lot of that is pushed out into the 2024 to 2038 fiscal years. And so the cash flow summary you can see has been increasing operating revenues, and operating expenses have been correspondingly increased. But the two major items that you see on this sheet are that bond issue that we were talking about for roughly $5 million. The next slide is the financial policies for the Stormwater Fund. And everything is in compliance except for the debt to equity ratio. And obviously, when you have a small fund and you issue $5 million in debt, there's no equity to support it. So the ratio is actually 58 to 42, which is better than you might expect, but definitely out of compliance. So with that, any other questions that the committee members might have?
Any of the committee members? There being no sad questions or happy ones or anything else, I'll entertain a motion. Mike Spell?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors, they approve the tentative stormwater fund budget for the fiscal year 2019 and acknowledge that it is not in compliance with adopted financial policies.
Thank you. I have a motion and a first. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mike Bennett. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There being no nays, it's unanimous. I think you're off the hook at this point.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, and
Excuse
if
me.
any of the committee members have any other further questions, feel free to contact me.
Yes, Mike Spell?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the fiscal staff. This presentation package was very easy to follow. I like the charts, the graphs to show how you've met your recommendations or not. You put a lot of effort into it and made it a lot easier to follow, especially the highlights where you pointed out where to look and what was bad and what was good. So thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could echo Mike's compliment, a lot of times with so many numbers, it's like a treasure hunt, looking for what data we're supposed to be looking for, and I really like the approach that was used. So compliments.
Well, now, see, this is better than going before the Board of Supervisors, right? I mean,
Thank you, and it was a team effort, and I would like to point out Pam's contributions to this. She was very instrumental in putting all this
thank you,
together for you.
Pam. We appreciate you, too.
My pleasure, thank you.
Okay. All right, so now let's move on to Darren, and we're going to look at this proposed reorganization plan.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Darren Schultz for the record. And what we're looking to do, I'll just kind of organize my notes here. What we're looking to do within the department and wanted to give an update here to this committee, and obviously I'm interested in what you have to say. We're kind of going through a little bit of a transition in Public Works, and we've been structured the way it currently is for some time now. And what has happened, for bad or for good, is one particular division or one particular manager in Public Works has been here for 32 years. And when you're here for 32 years and you start to know a lot about a lot of different things, you keep getting handed divisions of staff. And so over time, we've lopsided our department and put more on one manager than is appropriate. Where that really comes to bear is when it's time for that manager to retire, and there's no way to replace them. So it's been on my radar for a few years, and I've chosen to do it at this time with this budget cycle to better match, to better define the organization, the way work is really being done there currently and has been done for a while. So currently, the way it's set up now, you should have two sheets there in your packet. Currently, the way it's set up now is the director, and then there's 5 different separate divisions. I call them kind of senior manager level across Public Works, including administrative, transportation, engineering, environmental, and operations. And what I'm proposing is to expand that out a little bit, and administration would remain the same. There would continue to be a transportation division, but that division would get larger, and that fleet would move over there. Fleet is an existing division that falls under this kind of giant current operations division that I'm trying to break apart. And then we currently have an engineering division, and that would remain. There would be an engineering division, very little change there. Next then is I'm recommending that we create a standalone division of water. And currently the way it is we have water and wastewater that is it's kind of broken up amongst a number of divisions. And for instance, that's why you saw a change in our FTE assignments to those various funds, because I have one person, one name, but they're being billed part-time to multiple divisions. We can't get away from that totally because especially as at management level, when do we do the same thing all day? That just doesn't happen. But my goal is that there would be one senior manager over the water division and focus 100% on water. 100% of that person's time would be charged to the water fund. And then in doing that, pull all the little fingers of water that I currently have in the department amongst other divisions, pull those all in under one water division. If somebody calls and has a question on water, anything related to water, we know where that goes. Currently, we don't know where that goes. We have to ask more about what their question is and then route it to the right. I'm trying to create it so it's a one-stop shop, and there's one responsible person over water. So with that then comes the wastewater side, and so my intent then is to create a standalone wastewater division, which we currently don't have now, and everything wastewater would fall within that division as well. And then the operations division, we currently have an operations division. That's the bigger one with 66 FTEs in it that I was referring to. So we will continue to have an operations division, but it's going to go to half the size. And how I'm doing that is removing the utility facets of operations out of that division, putting them where they belong, and then operations will truly just focus on street maintenance, stormwater maintenance, warehouse, and the landfill. And then control systems is a current division that we have within Public Works, and it reports to the current operations division. And so my goal is to break that off as a standalone division, because control systems it impacts every other division that I have within Public Works. It doesn't necessarily fit within one because it works with all of them. So within controls are signals, so that's the street side. Within controls is water, within controls is wastewater, stormwater, the radio, the Carson City radio group, that's all within the control division. So it makes sense for that to be a standalone division. So that's a little bit of the nexus, the background of the way I'm suggesting the department be changed. And so with that, I'm also requesting that we bring back the position of Deputy Public Works Director. We used to have that position here in Carson City with this department. It was one of the positions we let go in the recession, and I'm quite anxious to bring it back on a personal note, but also it's appropriate for a department of this size to have a deputy, and I think we can manage things a lot better. In terms of that deputy's responsibility, and will I break the department up and have certain divisions report directly to that deputy, or will we manage it together? That's going to be a work in progress depending on how it moves forward. But ultimately, it's to get a little bit of help at the top to help us be doing the right things and make sure that no balls get dropped. One of the things, if I can go back, since this group is focused on utilities, I'm really trying to create a water division and a wastewater division that is more robust, is more focused on planning into the future, less reactive, more proactive, and I think by breaking them apart and making them focus groups, I can do that. I expect that there would be the senior manager in the water group would be over working with NDEP on a monthly basis, and the same goes for wastewater. We're currently not doing that. We're very reactive to NDEP as it stands right now. So that's the kind of overview of kind of what it's looking like. So I thought whether there will be questions, so I'll just get to that first. So the budget numbers that you saw today, that's the budget as it, without any reorganization in it. That's as we are now, projected for next year, fiscal 19. So if this reorganization gets passed, the way that it would affect the utility funds is the stormwater fund would have an additional cost of $9,467. The sewer fund would have a credit of $12,543, and the water fund would have an increase of $115,666. That's the impact of this reorg in terms of moving people around, hiring additional people that would have on these three utility funds. In terms of the additional people that I'm asking for it's three positions. One is a deputy public works director, as we discussed. The second position is the water manager, that new division. And then the third one is a GIS specialist. That's not necessarily related to the reorg. That's related to what's going on in GIS and the need to get more work done in GIS. So that's kind of independent, but that is also part of asking for three positions this next fiscal year. I just want to go through my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything, then I'll open it up for questions. So just a couple other highlights. The FTEs within Public Works has remained very relatively flat over the last 10 years. I haven't been going to the Board of Supervisors asking for additional positions. So this is something I take very seriously and only ask when there's a very big need. One of the other things of trying to flatten the organization, combine similar functions, and this will also help us reflect the total cost of what's going on within those funds. Now we're a little bit spread out. And then I really want to create an organization that will align staff within the divisions to have a real common goal on what they're working on and what they're working towards. And we try and do that within our divisions now, and we have some success. But if you think of somebody that's a few steps down within a water division and has a real idea of where they're going and something that they can achieve to, it's going to produce in them they're going to be more productive. They're going to be more interested in doing their job and to learning more because they have a career path of advancement in terms of where they could go. So I'm going to sum it up with that and open it up for questions.
All right, committee, Mike Spell.
Yeah, Darren, can you tell me why water would go up 115,000 when we're losing 5.8 FTEs from the projected budget? We're budgeted for 24.8. You're showing 19 FTEs. So that's a loss of 5.8 FTEs, and our cost went up 115,000. There should be a considerable savings on those FTEs.
Yes, Mike, there's a difference between my FTEs within these divisions and what's actually in the budget for FTEs. And the reason for that is because there's a number of people in Public Works that are charged to multiple different funds, whether it be water, sewer, stormwater, landfill. They're not all just within that fund. So that's the difference. That you're talking about there, it doesn't impact. I'm not, with my proposal, that I'm saying 19 in the water fund, that's 19 true, fast, hard bodies, FTEs there. That doesn't mean that there won't be overlap from other people working on water functions, a percentage of their time.
So there'd be an allocation.
That's correct. That's correct. So I'm not getting rid of that completely. For instance, we have our environmental group that answers to David. So that group works on landfill, water, wastewater, and stormwater. So those individuals, they're going to be shown in David's group because that's where they answer, but their time is spent across the divisions.
Thanks.
Mike?
Darren, this is down in the weeds, and I apologize for this. The schematics that you send out have the existing condition is 133 full-times. The proposal is 135. You mentioned, that's a difference of 2. You mentioned you're increasing by 3. One of those 3 being the GIS, although GIS is already allocated in engineering on both schedules. So is that position already budgeted for?
That's a very good question. Can you tell me in the bottom right-hand corner what the revised date is?
I see 118 on both mine.
Okay. That is an error on my part. The one I'm reading off says revised 131. And what to answer your question is I didn't try and do something fast. It's just that GIS position, it doesn't have anything to do with the utility funds. So it was kind of hanging out there by itself. But then I decided, you know what, I want to give this committee the exact same presentation that I'm going to give the Board of Supervisors. So I updated my sheet, and it says 136, and for 2 weeks after that sheet. But that was the intent.
Very good, thank you.
Well, I'll get to my questions, I guess. I don't see any. Randy, do you have a question?
I do. Several. Darren, what's your anticipated timing of this?
So the way this works is as part of the budget process, it has to go internally before the financial, what's it called, IFC, Internal Finance Committee. So that will happen this week. And that group decides on what citywide will be presented to the Board of Supervisors in terms of supplemental. This is considered a supplemental. And then this will be brought before the Board of Supervisors on April 20th.
19th.
April 19th, regular meeting as part of the budget process, and it will be a supplemental request as well as any other departmental supplemental requests citywide. If in fact it's approved, then the budget would be modified to update these changes to go into effect July 1, and the reorganization would take effect July 1.
Do you anticipate any of this coming back to this committee?
I do not anticipate that.
And you show transportation under Lucia and controls under James. Which of those two would be responsible for traffic signals and the timing of them?
So that falls, so James is involved with the technical, the maintenance, the operations of traffic signals.
Excuse me just a minute. Let's try and use position titles instead of names if we could.
I'm not sure what the position title is. Would that be transportation manager?
Transportation manager, that's correct.
Transportation manager overseeing transportation and controls manager?
Control systems manager. So the control systems manager would focus on the operations, the maintenance, of what's going on with the signals on a day-to-day basis. The transportation manager, if we were to do a signal timing study, they would manage it out of that division, but the control systems would be part of that process, be a player, be at the table, that sort of thing, because they're going to ultimately would have to implement it.
So controls system manager would do the actual timing as recommended by the transportation manager.
Exactly.
In the future, if this reorganization comes into effect, instead of David doing the yeoman's job, would we be seeing the water manager, David, over wastewater, and the operations manager, Rick Cooley, over stormwater, appearing before us?
Well, you probably wouldn't see me. Yes, there definitely would be a separate water manager that would be here at this meeting, and David would remain here. I haven't quite figured out, how the stormwater would fit into that, but perhaps there could be somebody else that would answer to that.
Overall, I like the way it looks. The only caution I would offer is that your span of control starts to get pretty broad with the seven different sections.
It does. That's a good point. I've studied it and read about it and looked at many other organizations in terms of how they're set up, and we discussed it at length with the senior management team in Public Works to figure out what's best. And I really wouldn't, don't like it quite so broad. My thought process, though, is with the deputy that would that will help that. And like I say, as needed in the future, it might serve that several of these would report directly to the deputy level and not necessarily to the director level.
Good job, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, and I guess a point or two. I think that taking the opportunity now for reorganization is a good step. With half of the FTEs essentially answering or coming through one division head now, that leaves you with, an imbalanced kind of a situation, particularly if you have a change or a retirement. So I think, and I think it's hard to figure which goes to where, but it looks to me like the breakdown here is pretty clean and pretty reasonable, given the divisions you'll be creating and the personnel and their backgrounds who will be involved in the process. I guess when I look at the water and the increase in cost to the water budget, I assume this is kind of the equivalent of a true-up in terms of where the people really are who are going to be contributing to those divisions, and how their costs should be allocated, which to me for this committee is another eye-opener in terms of probably a more realistic allocation of where the cost should be applied. Not that I like to see it hitting water so hard, but it's a tough one. But I do, in my mind, the reorganization makes a lot of sense. I think Randy's comment's good, and you acknowledge that. But having a deputy, I think, can help tremendously in separating. You're calling it different things, but you're still managing the same overall operation, and having it a little more clearly defined is going to facilitate management, I think, particularly with a deputy to assist you.
Okay. I agree with much of what the committee has said, but I have some concerns here about, Darren, I know that you were the deputy back in 2014 when our Public Works Director retired. And he retired effective June 2nd, 2014. And you moved up 3 months before that so that he could work with you and that you would be familiar with everything, which makes sense. That's the way it should work. And that's what you expect a deputy to be, is somebody who really is kind of trained to help step into your shoes in case you want to retire or you get another job offer or something along those lines. So I'm a little concerned about a deputy who himself may retire. I mean, we see this in state government where people get promoted 3 years before they retire, and then they retire with a much larger pension because they've gotten a raise for the last 3 years. And so I'm a little concerned about a deputy who's not being trained to help to step into your shoes if you should get another job or if you should leave or something, but instead may retire himself. That's one of my concerns. Secondly, I'm concerned also about the amount of money that we're spending on marathon employees, employees which I thought were people that were used on a short-term basis, that we would hire people who would come in for 3 months, for instance, in the summer. The parks gets people in to help with the fight fires and stuff like that and cut the grass and so forth. But I see that we have our former Public Works Director went to work for us the day after he retired and has been with us ever since through marathon contract at a pay rate of $100 an hour, or I guess something along those lines. And I guess we have a couple of employees that are working for us almost full-time on a marathon contract. And I'm thinking that if we cut back on some of those things where we could hire that would help pay for a full-time employee, somebody who could grow with Carson City and grow with the department and so forth to help take over some of these jobs as as people get older and retire and so forth. You know, I hate to see us lose our young people to other places for job opportunities. I guess, can you allay some of my concerns there?
I would be happy to, Madam Chair. Very good questions. So let me start with the first one regarding the Deputy Public Works Director. I do have a name here that I put on the list. Curtis Horton is currently our Operations Manager. He's worked for the city for 32 years. Curtis notified me that he wants to retire, and I don't blame him because he's working for pretty much nothing right now. That scared me. That scared all of us. If you ask any of the senior management team in Public Works, they will say they are scared of Curtis walking out the door right now. He has enough knowledge in his head over 32 years that when that leaves, that is going to create an exceptional hole. So one of the things that when I was setting up this, the way this looked, is I got the idea of Curtis Horton filling that role of Deputy Director on a short-term basis. And so I brought it up with him to see if he would be interested. He committed to me for 1 year and maybe slightly more than that, but that's it. He wants to retire. So the reason I really would like Curtis to fill that role temporarily, although it doesn't get me where I want to be in terms of a director and a deputy working together, spreading the load, it doesn't get me there as fast. What it does get me is if you look at my group, I have a pretty much vast majority of my senior managers have been with the city for 5 years or less. They need knowledge of how we do things and what's buried there and what happened 20 years ago. So my thought process was, what a better situation to have to be able to have Curtis here, start up this new organization. For instance, fleet is being moved to the transportation manager. The transportation manager has never done fleet before. So my thought process is, what better? The individual is very intelligent, and I'm comfortable she's going to learn it, but there's that period of time that it takes to get up to speed. What better than to have the current manager there working with you 2 offices away? How do I do this? How do I get through this? That sort of thing. And if you look at division by division, transportation, water, wastewater, operations, this individual has been involved in all of those for 32 years. And so that's how I came to that conclusion that made the most sense. And like I say, it was my idea, it wasn't his, and I convinced him that if this goes forward, that he could stay and help me out, and he really does want what's best for Carson City. He believes in the organization. So that's how I made that idea. It would be temporary. What happens when this individual does in fact retire, I don't know. I'll get there when we get there, and I'll be, once we get this through, then I'll start working on that next step. But ideally, that's how I looked at it. In terms of Marathon employees, we do have something coming up on the agenda showing that, but these are the full-time positions that we currently have in Budget Works, in Public Works. We do have a number of Marathon and part-time employees working for the city in Public Works. Some of these are Marathon employees, some of these are Manpower employees, and some of these are city employees, but they work less than 50% of the time, so they're an hourly city employee. We treat them all the same. They're temporary hourly employees to us. To kind of address some of the questions that came up, we have one individual on the list who is the manager of our construction project down at our wharf. So the way we looked at this a number of years ago was when you take a project that's worth $40 million plus and you go out and you get the money you need to do this improvement, who's going to manage that project? I can't take somebody that has a list of duties that they're doing and say, stop doing everything you're doing, I want you to go manage this project. It's a full-time job, $40 million, you all know that takes more than one person to do. So I didn't have that option, and I don't want to hire somebody full-time because it's a project. It's going to stop. It's going to go away. What do I do with that individual that I have here that I no longer have work for? So you have two options. You can either hire somebody on a contract basis, hourly, or you can hire a consultant to provide that person for you to manage the project. So we cross that bridge all the time with many different projects, whether it's inspections, material testing. That's always something that we're looking at. So for instance, for the WRF and for the individual that's listed there, Jim Morris, we brought him in as an hourly employee to manage that project for the city as a city employee, with the idea is when that project is done, he goes away. So I either had that option to do that, or I had the option of hiring a consultant to do that. And so we just did, in anticipation of questions, we reached out to some consultants, and I got an hourly rate for that individual and their expertise. And it's right around $220 an hour. So I feel it would be the wrong thing to, I could do that, but I'm not sure we like that direction either. So that's how those type of decisions get made, is what's best for the city in terms of that. In regards to Andy Burnham, the past Public Works Director, again.
We weren't going to use names.
I'm sorry, the past Public Works Director, he wouldn't mind. So what the nexus behind that is, as this department moves forward, the various funds, the various utilities, the various divisions, there's from time to time there's things that come up that need to be researched, and generally a white paper needs to be written, some sort of a, hey, we're getting asked a lot about this. What does it mean? Does it have merit? Can you get an answer? So when questions like that come in, we look around, who has time to do that right now? Who doesn't? So then your options again are, do you hire a consultant to do a little study for you, or do you look at an hourly employee to do a little study for you? In this case, the previous Public Works Director comes with a lot of knowledge of Carson City and Public Works. So when I have a little study that needs to be done, rather than hiring somebody, spending time and money to get them up to speed, do the report, put them out the door, I can get there much quicker, much cheaper with this individual. So he's worked on a number of different projects. He was the one who did our landfill master plan over the last year. So we looked at hiring a consultant to do that, got some rough numbers of what it would cost, looked and said, hey, what if we do it in-house with this person individually, hourly? And, it's about 30% of the cost. So those are decisions that I'm making and using moving forward.
And has his work been almost full-time for us?
Oh, absolutely not. I would say he averages probably 8 hours. I would say he averages 12 hours every 2 weeks, 12 to 15 hours every 2 weeks.
Pretty much ongoing through the years since he retired.
That's correct.
And I guess my concern is because I know there's a state law that forbids state employees from retiring, taking their pension, and then turning around and signing a contract with the state unless it's approved as a position that is desperately needed and so forth. And evidently we have nothing in the local government area as far as that's concerned. And so was this approved by our present city manager was not working for us at that time. So was this something that was approved by the previous city manager?
It was. It's my understanding of that is, for instance, I couldn't retire from the city, go work for a consultant, and then a month later that consultant come and get a contract with Carson City for me to do work. My understanding of that, bringing somebody back on an hourly temporary basis, I don't believe it's the same. But yes, I did get proper authority to do this.
Okay. And this is the next item on our agenda, which is contracts and this marathon. And I sort of see that it blends with employees. That's why I brought it up at the time, because if we're hiring people, then I'm wondering why we need to hire so many temporary people. So with this, for instance, where does this come in the budget, these payments to Marathon? Does that come under personnel? Does that come under professional services?
So that comes out, so anybody, like I say, we bring those employees in on an hourly basis, and that gets paid for depending on what project they're working on. It would get paid for directly out of that fund. So in terms of the utility funds, it's the line item that, no, so for instance, if in our, down at our WRF, that project, so if I bring in an hourly person to do a specific project that is a capital project, I'm billing that individual directly to that project. That's a project expense to manage that project. When I bring somebody in like the past Public Works Director to do a study for me on something, then that gets billed under the line item. I'm sorry, I had it marked and then I closed my sheet here. I should know it, but we just changed the title, I'm sorry. Not just, but. So that would be billed under temporary staffing. Yes. So I'm currently looking at the budget here for water, so we're proposing next year $85,000 in temporary staffing. So, I mean, that's, I would say, you know, maybe 10% of that would roughly go towards the type of stuff we're talking about. The remaining part is temporary staffing that is used in the operations and maintenance, hourly employees during the summer to do extra work within the, on the water system.
And that's what I would expect it to be used for, is, feet on the ground on a temporary basis. So that's why I was so surprised to see that it was being used in a much larger concept than what I had thought we would use it for. Committee, are there any questions from anybody? Mike Spell?
Yeah, Darren, so like on the individual who's working on the capital project, I'm looking at capital outlay. We have construction line item, we have labor and construction projects. Would he be charged to the labor line item then?
That's
and
right.
Then it would be capitalized.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Mike Bennett?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think when you take the marathon discussion out of context, it's alarming. But in my personal life, I do work on the consultant side, and I can relay that what Darren is describing is exactly accurate. A person of the caliber that would be managing, at least in my firm, a $40 million construction project and we're billing him out at quite a high rate. So I think it's the right thing to do. Again, out of context, there's some questions, there's some eyebrows that would raise, but when you look at it, what it's doing for the city, the benefit it's adding, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Any other comments? But Randy?
I agree with what Mike just described as far as billing rates and stuff. It's, if you bring in a consulting firm, you've got overhead that you have to pay for in addition to maybe a skill set that is might be more than a specific project may need, but still it's going to be not as economical as the current arrangement. Another comment is, I think the concept of building your new organization and having somebody with 32 years experience stay on for an additional year so that that individual can mentor the section heads. I think there's a lot of merit to it. I would offer as a suggestion is that lay out a plan ahead of time as to what the mentoring is going to be, so you don't get to the 12th month and say, God, I wish I had a little bit more time. Overall, I agree with everything you've said here.
So after a year, then, will you be doing another reorganization, or, I mean,
No, and I want to go on the record that the year timeframe is loose. I'm not, nobody's signing a contract. The year timeframe is loose, but that's approximately what we're looking at. No, my anticipation is not to reorg. I will try and do this as least as possible, but when necessary. But no, I don't anticipate another reorg in the next, I would hate to say, but it's certainly not going to be in the next year or 2 or 3.
so water, though, is not bearing the brunt of that cost, right?
Well, I went over the costs that the utility funds were. The reason that water is taking a hit of over $100,000 is because I am establishing a water manager that just oversees water, which we're currently not doing, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think we need to get out in front of some of these initiatives that are coming with regards to water and just get a better hold of it. It's a very, very valuable asset, but there's a lot of things we could be doing looking into the future that we're currently not really doing very well, and I'm looking forward to accomplishing that.
Well, I think we'll all be interested in hearing what that is. So certainly this committee would be. So, that's great. Is there anything else on this issue? If not, then, and I see no more public comments, let's move ahead to staff updates. Let's see, I guess we got all that. Is there anything else that, any announcements from anyone? No public comment. I did call for it a couple of times, Dan. So if that, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mike Bennett and Bruce, Mike Bennett moved and Bruce Scott seconded. No discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.